I dropped the two black garbage bags onto the concrete porch. The plastic hit the ground with a dull thud that echoed in the quiet Henderson neighborhood. Valerie stared at the bags, then up at me. The color drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a mask applied to the wrong person. Her hands shook as she grabbed the doorframe. "You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate my property," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I stood in the doorway of the house I grew up in, watching the woman who had spent 12 years trying to erase me realize she had just been written out of the narrative. She had no idea what she had just done. To understand how a 8-year-old actuary ended up kicking a grieving widow onto a Nevada lawn, you have to rewind 30 days to the morning after my father died. The first thing that hit me when I walked through the front door that day was not sorrow. It was the sharp chemical sting of industrial bleach. My father had been in the ground for less than 24 hours, and Valerie was already scrubbing his existence from the baseboards. She stood in the kitchen hallway wearing a pair of yellow rubber gloves and a pristine white blouse. The smell of lemon and chlorine burned the back of my throat. She was wiping down the exact spot on the granite counter where my father used to leave his coffee mug every morning. Two heavy-duty trash bags sat at her feet. "Your room is clear," Valerie said. She stripped off the yellow gloves and tossed them into the sink. "I packed the clothes and the books you left here. I need your house key, Lucinda." I looked at the black plastic bags sagging against the tile floor. 18 years of my life in this house reduced to whatever she deemed worth keeping. "I still have boxes in the garage," I said. My voice was flat. "In my profession, you learn to keep emotion out of the data. Trent is moving his gym equipment in there this afternoon," she replied smoothly. She offered a tight, practiced smile that stopped at her cheekbones. "You understand? We need the space to breathe. It is what your father would have wanted for us." My father would not have wanted any of this, but arguing with Valerie was like negotiating with a slot machine. The house always won. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing the cold brass of my house key. Then a memory surfaced. A loose floorboard in the back corner of the attic where I used to hide my diaries as a child. A place Valerie never visited due to her aversion to dust and the suffocating Nevada heat. "I left a winter coat upstairs," I said. I stepped past her before she could object. "I will be down in 2 minutes." I did not wait for permission. I took the stairs 2 at a time and pulled the cord for the attic hatch. The trapped heat hit me instantly. It felt like stepping into an oven. I navigated the exposed wooden joists by memory, keeping my balance in the dim light coming through the roof fence. I made my way to the far corner behind the humming air conditioning unit. I dropped to my knees and pried the loose cedar plank up with my fingernails. Sitting in the pink fiberglass insulation was a small metal lockbox. A thick layer of gray dust coated the lid. My mother had put it there a few weeks before she passed away. She told a 10-year-old me it was a rainy day secret. I wiped the dust away with the hem of my shirt. The box was heavy. I slipped it into my canvas tote bag, arranged my sweater over it, and lowered the attic hatch. I was halfway down the main staircase when a shadow blocked the landing. Trent. He was 24, perpetually unemployed, and smelling of cheap cologne. He was leaning against the banister, blocking my path to the front door. On his wrist, he wore a vintage gold Rolex. It belonged to my father. The metal band hung loose, sliding down Trent's arm because he had not bothered to get it sized. Mom said, "You are leaving," Trent said. He eyed my tote bag. "What is in there?" "A coat," I said. "Let me see." He took a step up, closing the distance between us. Mom said, "We need to check what you take. Make sure you are not walking out with anything valuable." In my day job as an actuary, my entire career revolves around assessing risk and projecting outcomes. I calculate mortality rates, financial ruin, and human error. I do not panic. I run the numbers. I looked at the gold watch sliding around his wrist, then met his gaze. "The police response time in this zip code is 6.5 minutes, I told him. I kept my tone conversational. "If you try to touch my bag, I will call dispatch. I will report an attempted assault. And while the officers are here, I will ask them to verify the ownership of the Rolex you are currently wearing. A watch that is scheduled to be inventoried in probate court next week." Trent froze. His eyes darted to the watch, then back to me. the unearned confidence fractured in real time. He opened his mouth, closed it, and took a step back, pressing his spine against the hallway wall. I walked past him. I grabbed the 2 garbage bags Valerie had left by the door. I set my house key on the entry table. The metal clinked against the wood. I walked out into the blinding midday sun and loaded the bags into my trunk. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, parked 2 blocks away. The Nevada sun beat down on the windshield, turning the interior into a greenhouse. I ignored the sweat gathering at the back of my neck. I placed the metal lockbox on the passenger seat. The flimsy factory lock gave way with a sharp twist of a flathead screwdriver I kept in my glove compartment. The lid popped open. Inside sat 3 items. A sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's elegant sloping handwriting, a small silver key, and a thick cream-colored business card for a trust attorney based in downtown Las Vegas. His name was Harrison. Before I could reach for the letter, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. It was an automated alert from my banking application. I picked up the phone. The screen displayed a red warning icon. Action required. Joint account ending in 442. Status, frozen. I tapped the notification. A secondary alert popped up immediately beneath it. The life insurance policy my father had paid into for 30 years was also suspended. The status code indicated a legal hold. I pulled up the detailed claim status. The accounts had not been frozen by the bank algorithm. They had been manually locked due to a third-party report. Reason for hold: pending investigation for elder financial abuse. Filing party: Valerie James. I stared at the screen. She was not just kicking me out of the house. She was cutting off my resources. She was tying me up in a bureaucratic nightmare. She was framing me for a felony so I would be too busy fighting the bank to fight her for the estate. She struck first, assuming I would crumble under the legal pressure. I set the phone down. I picked up the cream-colored business card from the lockbox. I ran my thumb over the embossed lettering. Valerie thought she had the winning hand because she held a house key and a fake abuse claim. She did not know I just found the one box she missed. I dialed the Las Vegas number. The line rang twice before a receptionist answered. The following weeks were a blur of legal strategy and quiet preparation. Harrison, the trust attorney, was a sharp, no-nonsense professional. He explained that my mother, knowing her time was limited, had established an irrevocable trust. This trust held the deed to the commercial property where my father's freight logistics company operated, as well as the deed to our family home. The trust stipulated that upon my father's passing, I would become the sole trustee and beneficiary. Valerie's claim to the estate was entirely predicated on a forged will, a document Gregson, her lawyer, was trying to push through probate court. But a forged will could not override a properly executed, pre-existing trust. My mother had created an impenetrable legal fortress. The day of the executive board meeting arrived. Valerie, dressed in a crimson power suit, sat at the head of the polished oak table, flanked by Gregson and Trent. She exuded an air of triumphant confidence, oblivious to the legal trap she was about to walk into. The company's executive board, including David, the operations manager, sat opposite her, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. I stood by the door, a silent observer. Valerie started. As the new majority shareholder and CEO, I intend to implement immediate changes. She launched into a detailed plan for restructuring the company, clearly relishing her perceived victory. Gregson nodded approvingly, occasionally interjecting with legal jargon to reinforce her authority. Trent, meanwhile, sat back, a smug grin plastered on his face, occasionally checking his phone. When Valerie finally paused for breath, I stepped forward. "Actually, Valerie," I said, my voice calm and clear, "there's been a slight misunderstanding regarding the ownership of the company's headquarters." I placed a thick folder on the table, sliding it towards David. "This is the deed to the commercial property. It's held in an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole trustee." David picked up the folder, his eyes widening as he read the documents. The color drained from Valerie's face. Gregson snatched the papers from David, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "This is impossible," he stammered. "The will clearly states." The will you're attempting to probate is a forgery, I interrupted. And even if it weren't, it cannot supersede a pre-existing, properly filed, irrevocable trust. My mother established this trust years ago, specifically to protect these assets. I explained that the trust allowed the freight company to operate on the property under a generous arrangement, but that arrangement terminated automatically upon my father's death. The operating entity is now a tenant at will. I turned my attention back to Valerie. Her face had gone completely pale. The crimson suit suddenly looked entirely out of place on a woman who was rapidly shrinking in stature. If you assume executive control of this company today, I told her, the rent structure changes immediately to reflect fair market value for an industrial dispatch center in this zip code. As the legal landlord, I am adjusting the monthly overhead. The new lease rate is $30,000 per month. It is due on the 1st of every month starting today. You are also liable for a 3-month security deposit. I looked at David again. Can the operating account sustain an unexpected cash drain of $120,000 today and an ongoing annual liability of $360,000? David shook his head without hesitation. No, the margins in freight logistics are razor thin. Fuel costs and driver insurance consume most of the gross revenue. A rent hike of that magnitude will drain our cash reserves within 4 weeks. We would default on payroll. The company would face bankruptcy before the end of the quarter. Valerie slammed her hands down on the oak table. This is extortion! You cannot do this! We will move the trucks! We will find a new headquarters! Gregson closed the folder. His voice was grim. Moving a dispatch center requires capital, Valerie. It requires environmental permits, new routing infrastructure, and months of transition time. If the trust demands market rate rent today, the LLC is effectively paralyzed. She holds a loaded gun to the head of the business. The executives at the table were smart people. They recognized a lethal liability. Valerie was not a leader. She was an anchor, threatening to drag the entire corporate structure straight to the bottom of the ocean. David stood up from his chair. He picked up his coffee cup. Valerie, he said calmly, the executive board cannot recognize your appointment under these conditions. Taking your leadership would violate our fiduciary duty to keep the company solvent. We must decline your transition. He pressed a button on the intercom sitting in the center of the table. Marcus, we need security in the second-floor boardroom. We have unauthorized visitors refusing to leave. Valerie stood frozen. The reality of the trap closed around her. She had marched into the room expecting a coronation. Instead, she received an eviction notice. A burly security guard wearing a dark uniform stepped through the heavy wooden doors. He gestured toward the hallway, waiting for Valerie and Trent to walk out. Trent turned around immediately. He dragged the oversized suit jacket toward the exit, eager to escape the humiliating tension in the room. Valerie lingered for a second. She glared at me, her eyes burning with a desperate, venomous heat. She did not speak. She turned on her heel and marched out of the room, her lawyer trailing close behind her. As they walked down the corridor toward the elevator, I watched through the glass wall of the boardroom. Gregson was already talking frantically into his cell phone. He understood the impenetrable nature of a Nevada Asset Protection Trust. He knew his forged testament was worthless against a commercial deed. His only legal maneuver was a desperate one. He was calling his paralegal to file an emergency petition in the district court, attempting to invalidate the trust by alleging my mother committed financial fraud a decade ago. But Valerie was not listening to her attorney. She pulled her own phone from her designer handbag. Legal channels were too slow and too uncertain for a woman owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to casino collectors. She needed to destroy my leverage immediately. She needed to ruin my credibility, my career, and my life. She scrolled through her contacts and dialed a number belonging to a shadow operator, a private investigator who specialized in finding dirt, creating scandals, and burying difficult people. She was escalating the war, moving from corporate boardrooms into the dark, dangerous alleys of personal destruction. I left the industrial district and merged onto the highway, keeping my speed precisely at the posted limit. The morning sun glared off the concrete, forcing me to lower the visor. In the field of actuarial science, we map risk by studying predictability. Human beings are creatures of habit. They take the path of least resistance. They make the same choices day after day, creating a baseline of behavior. When a variable deviates from that baseline, it triggers an anomaly. The dark gray sedan sitting 2 car lengths behind me was a glaring anomaly. I noticed the vehicle when I exited the logistics company parking lot. I made 3 consecutive right turns through a residential neighborhood, a route that offered no navigational efficiency. The sedan mirrored every single turn, maintaining the exact same distance. The driver was executing a standard surveillance tail, but he was doing it poorly. He relied on the assumption that a suspended corporate employee would be too distracted by her ruined career to check her rearview mirror. I did not panic. I simply memorized the license plate number reflected in my glass. I drove to a quiet coffee shop in Summerlin, parked my car in the open lot, and walked inside. The smell of roasted espresso and baked sugar hung heavy in the air-conditioned room. I purchased a black coffee, selected a small table near the front window, and opened my laptop. Through the tinted glass, I watched the gray sedan pull into a spot across the street. The driver killed the engine, but remained behind the wheel. Valerie had dispatched a private investigator. This was exactly the kind of predictable escalation I had anticipated. Valerie, cornered and desperate, would resort to dirty tactics. My mother, in her infinite wisdom, had prepared me for this too. The silver key from the lockbox wasn't for a safe deposit box, but for a secure online server. Inside, I found a meticulously organized digital archive. My mother had documented everything. Valerie's extravagant spending habits, her mounting casino debts, and even her past attempts to manipulate my father's finances. There were emails, bank statements, and even recorded phone calls. It was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. I spent the next few days meticulously compiling the information. I cross-referenced dates, amounts, and communications. The picture that emerged was stark. Valerie had been systematically draining my father's personal accounts for years, using the money to fund her lavish lifestyle and gambling addiction. The elder financial abuse claim she filed against me was a desperate attempt to deflect attention from her own crimes. I sent the entire dossier, anonymously, to the district attorney's office, the state gaming commission, and, most importantly, to the major news outlets in Las Vegas. The next morning, the local news exploded with headlines about a prominent socialite's alleged financial fraud and gambling debts. Valerie's carefully constructed facade crumbled in an instant. The casino collectors, who had been circling like vultures, now had public confirmation of her financial ruin. Her credit lines were cut, her assets frozen, and her reputation irrevocably shattered. Gregson, seeing the writing on the wall, quickly withdrew from representing her, citing irreconcilable differences. The final confrontation happened at the house. I had obtained an eviction notice for Valerie, based on the trust's ownership of the property. When I arrived, the 2 black garbage bags were already on the porch, filled with her belongings. Trent was there too, looking disheveled and agitated. He had obviously spent the night at the casino, trying to win back his mother's lost fortune. He saw the bags, then looked at Valerie, who was sobbing uncontrollably in the foyer. "What's going on, Mom?" he demanded, his voice laced with panic. "Where are we going to live?" Valerie could only point at me, tears streaming down her face. "She did this, Trent. She ruined everything." Trent looked at me, then at the garbage bags. He didn't say a word. He just turned, stepped over the bags, and walked out the door, abandoning his mother without a second glance. That's when I dropped the bags on the porch and told Valerie she had 30 minutes to vacate. In the end, Lucinda's victory was absolute because she relied on the unshakable foundation her mother provided. She did not scream, she did not act out of malice, and she did not compromise her ethics. She simply let the math, the law, and the truth do the heavy lifting. There is a deep, resonant satisfaction in watching quiet competence dismantle loud entitlement. My mother knew that teaching a child to be honest and fair also requires teaching them how to survive in a world that often is neither. By securing the commercial property and the home, she gave me the ultimate gift, the permission to never be a victim. That is the highest form of parental responsibility, preparing a child for a world you will not be around to navigate for them. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we witnessed Valerie and her son Trent. Valerie represents the dark, destructive side of parenting, where affection is conditional and heavily reliant on material acquisition. In an era obsessed with instant gratification and curated appearances, Valerie prioritized the illusion of wealth over the substance of character. She raised Trent in a shallow pool of entitlement. She taught him to covet the vintage gold Rolex, the tailored suits, and the easy cash without ever demanding he put in the labor, the discipline, or the integrity required to earn them. Within the structure of a traditional family, fairness, accountability, and honesty are the bedrock of character development. Valerie bypassed those virtues entirely, choosing instead to model manipulation, theft, and deception. And what was her ultimate reward? The moment the money evaporated, the moment the casino collectors closed in, and the true cost of her actions became a terrifying reality, Trent abandoned her. He stepped over the black garbage bags and walked out the door, leaving her sobbing on the foyer floor. Valerie did not just lose the house that day, she lost her son. Because she had never taught him loyalty, sacrifice, or integrity, he possessed no foundation to stand on. She taught him to run toward the money, and when the money vanished, he simply kept running. Then there is my father, a tragic figure caught in the middle. His character serves as a vital warning about the dangers of passivity in parenthood. Keeping the peace in a blended family is a delicate, often exhausting endeavor. However, prioritizing a superficial peace over the fundamental protection of your child is a severe dereliction of duty. His silence allowed Valerie to bulldoze his daughter's history, rip out her mother's garden, and push me to the margins of my own home. Yet in his final fading moments, his conscience flared. That deliberately altered signature, Richard T. James, was a desperate, silent apology. It was the breadcrumb of a man who realized entirely too late that he had failed to be the shield his daughter so desperately needed. His story teaches us that avoiding conflict does not eliminate the conflict. It simply shifts the heavy burden onto the shoulders of our children. We must have the courage to have difficult conversations, to enforce boundaries, and to demand fairness within our own walls while we still have the strength to speak. I returned to a quiet house, restored my mother's legacy, and finally sat on the porch swing alone in the fading Nevada light. The quiet daughter won the war. But as the wind blew through the newly planted agave, one has to wonder if the absolute certainty of victory ever truly erases the grief of having to fight the war in the first place. You can secure the assets, you can lock the doors, and you can win the day. But the soil remembers everything that was buried there. What are you burying in yours?